Welcome in, everybody, to the Full-Time Fantasy Podcast. I am your co-host, Billy Muzio. With me, as always, my partner in crime, Jody Smith. We are going to be recording prior to Thursday Night Football. We're going to be talking about some key injuries this week that are going to be shaking up the top of our ranks. Those players include Deebo Samuel. How does that impact Brandon Ayuk? How does that impact George Kittle and Christian McCaffrey? And then we are all anticipating the return of Jamar Chase this week. How does that impact the rest of this receiving corps as well as the running back corps? Are we going to see Joe Mixon this week coming back from a concussion? And then lastly but not least, we're going to touch base on Najee Harris, his injury, that oblique injury, how to shake up this backfield, and then what the absence of Darnell Mooney is going to look like for this Chicago wide receiver passing corps. So, Jody, let's just dive right into it. Let's talk about Deebo Samuel. So he did not practice today, Thursday, because of that quad injury. A midweek downgrade is never a good thing. So he was limited yesterday, Wednesday, but never a great thing for his outlook for the week. It's possible maybe he's just getting a full day of maintenance. That being said, he played through a hamstring last week. He managed 43 scoreless yards. And the receivers are pretty stacked overall in terms of weapons in this offense. I mean, we just mentioned the names: George Kittle, Christian McCaffrey, Brandon Ayuk. It's not like they absolutely need him to play. That being said, the Dolphins are definitely a tough opponent this week. And it's a revenge game narrative for the old offensive coordinator, now new head coach for the Dolphins, McDaniels. What does the absence of Deebo Samuel, or I should say the possible absence of Deebo Samuel, look like for this offense for the 49ers?
Well, you'd have to like it from the standpoint of, an upgrade for Brandon Ayuk. At this point, actually, Ayuk has more fantasy points on the season than Deebo does. I think Brandon Ayuk's like wide receiver 16 in PPR format, and Deebo's 20. And it's been kind of a concern for Deebo to just not utilizing him as much as a runner. And that's been particularly since the acquisition of Christian McCaffrey. Now, maybe with the 49ers a little banged up, with their RB2 right now, maybe that tells them this week they're going to use Deebo a little bit more as a runner. But however, if he's legitimately hurt, you're definitely not wanting to risk him. The 49ers are in a position where they're serious NFC contenders. So at this point, you're not going to want to risk him, taking unnecessary punishment that he would out of the backfield. So I don't necessarily expect they're going to utilize him anymore as a running back if he's, even active this week. The key point of what you said is it's generally a concern, and a bad concern to at least be either full or partial practice Tuesday, Wednesday, and then to have a downgrade Thursday is bad. Tomorrow will be telling, but overall, this is an intriguing matchup. There's a lot of points potential in this game, and you mentioned the revenge factor for Raheem Mostert and their coach having those ties.
Wilson now too.
Yep, the whole backfield could be an interesting dynamic in that regard. But I figure if Deebo's active, to me, he comes across as he's wide receiver 20 for the season, and that's about the range I probably would have him rated. Like I said, he's not contributing as much out of the backfield as he used to be. That maybe that changes with Elijah Mitchell being gone for the season now. I don't know. I don't necessarily expect it. So somebody in our Discord sent me a question, and the answer was going to be Ayuk. For me, because, at this point, he's been their clear wide receiver one with what Jimmy Garoppolo's been doing. And that's another guy, Garoppolo, I think his numbers were a little muted last week. And it's a good matchup overall for San Francisco's offense. But
last week, Brandon Ayuk played 97.1% of the snaps compared to Deebo Samuel, who played 78.6% of the snaps. You hit the hammer on the nail. You said Brandon Ayuk's been their wide receiver one. Deebo more of that hybrid role. I think you also hit the hammer on the nail when you said that maybe he'll be more involved in the rushing game with Mitchell out. I definitely could foresee that, if he's on the field, of course, first and foremost. But if he is, maybe this week they take it easy on him because of the injury. But you have to like the matchup altogether for the rest of this. The rest of these weapons here in San Francisco. Brandon Ayuk, currently both of our wide receiver 22s on the week, on the year as well, wide receiver 22 in fantasy points per game. How high would you move him in your rankings? Let's just say, hypothetical speaking. So bear with me here. Play along. If Deebo was ruled out tomorrow, how high would Brandon Ayuk move up your rankings?
You might move him up half a dozen spots. If you said we have him around 20 right now, I could see him getting closer to, that wide receiver 12 to 15 range. The general lack of passing volume in that offense is what hesitates for me, thinking even in a really, really good matchup that he has top 10 potential. It just hasn't been there. He would become, he'd have to have a pair of touchdowns or whatever for me to feel comfortable with putting him as a top 10. And in particular, this week when there's only two teams on bye. So, I think you could move him up to that, round 14 to 16 range pretty comfortably.
I like the call. That's exactly where I'd have him as well. Let's talk about George Kittle. Great matchup. Miami gives it the third most fantasy points to the tight end position. Kittle comes in as my tight end 3 on the week right now. Your tight end 5. ECR is 5. How high would you move him up if Debo was ruled out? And if he's in, do you just leave him where you have him?
Kittle's a guy I keep. Overall, I feel comfortable with him right there at 3. I'm never going to rank him ahead of Kelsey or Mark Andrews. Those are, your solid locked-in tier. There's plenty of weeks where I do have Kittle as my tight end 3, and it feels like every time I do ranking there, if he does what last week, where I believe I had him my tight end 3 ahead of T.J. Hawkinson last week, and Kittle came through with whatever he had last week. I don't know, 50 yards, 3 catches, something like that. It was it wasn't spectacular, but again, for him to be there, you're almost guaranteeing that he has to, score a touchdown. Good news there is Dolphins, like you said, have given up the third most fantasy points. That includes seven touchdown catches for tight ends this year. So there's just doing the math, there's a better than 50% chance that he gets in. So you could easily justify the highest you could reasonably put George Kittle is 3. Like I said, you're not starting him ahead of, or you're not ranking him ahead of Kelsey and Andrews, but he'll probably end up, depending on what news we hear about Debo. Yes, you could easily move him up to 3, but right now, he'll be 4 or 5, somewhere in there, right?
Christian McCaffrey, also battling a knee issue, seems to be more of an irritation rather than an injury, and appears to be definitely more of a load issue than anything. That being said, Mitchell is also out for the foreseeable future. Where does Christian McCaffrey come in your Week 13 rankings, and do you have him higher now in your rest of season rankings with Mitchell out?
No, I don't think I've adjusted him much. The 49ers seem like they're insisting on kind of limiting his workload since he's been there. He's not getting near the dominant amount of touches. He hasn't been as active near the goal line. I don't know if it's just been, game flow issues or if it's actually being schemed that way, which is kind of curious because, I also mentioned that they're not using Debo Samuel as much as a run out of the backfield. So it's kind of curious to me. Maybe with Elijah Mitchell being out, they don't necessarily trust Jordan Mason or Tevin Coleman or whoever else they trot out there as RB2 and 3 this week. Maybe they go ahead and unleash Christian McCaffrey a little bit more. There was positive news today on the injury, which sounds encouraging. But as of right now, I haven't adjusted him in my rankings at all. I feel pretty comfortable about where he is. You'll have to look it up. I want to say he's in the RB6 or 7 or 5 or 8, somewhere in that range. And until normally Christian McCaffrey is a guy in the past who's always been plugged in as either your RB1 or at worst your RB3. But to me, he's just a hair below that now, simply because since being traded, he's just not being used as much around the goal line, and it seems like he when they go to the foot coverage in that game, it feels like he's being spelled. From a snap count standpoint, he's spending a lot more time maybe resting or being limited than he was when he was with Carolina. So to me, that drops him slightly.
So you mentioned a couple of the backup running backs. Let's talk about the RB2 now in San Francisco. The only other running backs currently on the roster right now are Jordan Mason, who was an undrafted free agent in the 2022 draft class. There was also Tyrion Davis-Price, who was drafted pick 3.29 from LSU. And who are we expecting to take on the bulk of the RB2 workload? I think we're both in agreement that if healthy, Debo is going to see a lot of those reps. But with Debo banged up, potentially him being out, fancy me here. If Debo was out, which one of these guys are you trusting more, Jordan Mason or Tyrion Davis-Price?
I mean, let's not forget Tevin Coleman. Earlier this year, when San Francisco had a chance to elevate anybody else to their RB2 in a week, they actually went with Coleman, and he came through and had a really productive fantasy game. Of course, right after that, he went right back to the bench. So it's a little frustrating standpoint. Last week Mason was the guy. I think it just happened to have been a coincidence that he was active. Maybe it was a special teams type situation, but he was thrust into action because Elijah Mitchell exited the game and wasn't able to return. So I don't know. I mean, looking at just last week's action, it feels like Mason could be a factor. I mean, they chose to elevate him and have him active last week and over Davis-Price.
That's because he plays special teams though too. Though.
Right.
I mean,
that's generally what I figure here. I don't know right now, going by what it must have been some blurb I saw on Twitter, or maybe it was Roto World talking about Tevin Coleman could factor in. I mean, really, it's a situation to avoid. I mean, and we're getting close to the fantasy playoffs. I think they're getting eerily close. So, and there's only 2 teams on bye this week. So, if fantasy people are struggling to figure out which of these backs in San Francisco to pick up for this week, that's kind of that's a really, really bad situation. Like I said, now next week there's a full 6 teams on bye. That's a whole different red flag lights and sirens scenario to get people panicked in a lot of leagues. You know what? Their playoffs actually start next week. It's so crazy to have, such a large percentage of the field unavailable in what could be the playoffs. But I don't have a lot of confidence in handicapping that situation right now. Forced to pick. I'd pick Tevin Coleman because earlier this year, when the opportunity arose, they gave him the ball and, he came through for him. So that kind of, that's going to kind of appeal to Kyle Shanahan that he knows he can go to his, trusted veteran over these undrafted youngsters, even though he's got such a great track record with undrafted kids. But, forced to pick, I lean Coleman right now.
Moving along, Jamar Chase hip was limited in Thursday's practice. That makes 2 back-to-back limited sessions. When interviewed, Chase spoke extensively to the media Wednesday, indicating that he'll likely be up for Sunday's game against the Chiefs, and we're going to see how he feels, or he's, quote, how I feel later in the week, but I'm expecting to take some game reps. That does not sound promising for a full workload, at least for us, for a rankings perspective or for a fantasy perspective, for people who may be relying on him back in their lineups. If he is active, I mean, there's no way we can bench Chase, that being said, but where would he fall into your rankings if active this weekend?
This is Jamar Chase. He's a phenomenal athlete. If you knew for a fact that Jamar Chase was going to be in on, 40 or 45% of snaps, you're starting over almost. I mean, he's a definite, even playing less than half the snaps. If it was a guarantee, you're still starting him over probably like all but 15, 20 wide receivers in football. And let's not mention that the over-under on this game is bonkers. So at this point, you want your Bengals in, you want your Chiefs in. It should be a really, really fantastic game. But I don't know if it's just them trying to, be cautious, or I don't know if he's just saying that to get the Chiefs to, kind of relax, whatnot. Andy Reid will have his team ready to play regardless. So I feel like personally, if Jamar Chase is active, I'm taking that risk. I'd have to have a really, really stacked roster with loaded guys, and maybe just starting 3 wideouts is the requirement for this league. And I don't know, somebody like Tyler Boyd is my wide receiver 3 because I drafted, I went with the 0 RB, and that's the strength of my team. I just couldn't see a scenario where, as long as he's active, I can't see a scenario where I'm benching him.
So he hasn't played since week 7. That being said, T. Higgins has been pretty darn useful in fantasy purposes during that absence. Week 7, he was wide receiver 22. Week 8, wide receiver 23. That was versus Cleveland. Week 9 versus Carolina, he was wide receiver 23. Week 11 versus Pittsburgh, wide receiver 4. And then last week versus Titans, wide receiver 6. Where does Higgins land in your rankings this week, with and without Jamar Chase?
I believe I've got him as a wide receiver 1 right now. He might be, whatever. I don't have my rankings open in front of me because I've opened up too many windows. It slows it slows down my Wi-Fi. But I want to say he's probably like wide receiver 9 or 10, somewhere in that range right now, which feels about right. Jamar Chase is active, and we hear some promising things like maybe he won't be on any sort of snap count or whatever. I'll move Chase ahead of Higgins, but Higgins would still come. I'm not dropping him, too much lower than I don't know. I mean, what's the absolute lowest I would rank Higgins this week? I don't know, somewhere like 16 to 18. I mean, it's just such an appealing matchup with a 53 over under. So, like I said, even Tyler Boyd is the guy that you want to try to plug into your lineups this week.
Yeah, I just pulled up our rankings. You have him at 9. I have him at 11, but I have it with, right now, Jamar Chase playing. If he was ruled out, I'd move him back up in that 8 or 9 range.
Gotcha.
So we're both fairly close there. How about Tyler Boyd? Wide receiver 36 year to date. Only has one top 10 finish since Jamar Chase absence. That was in the week that Chase got hurt. That was week 7 versus Atlanta. Since then, he was wide receiver 28 in week 8 versus Cleveland, wide receiver 32 week 9 versus Carolina, wide receiver 55 versus Pittsburgh, who is the worst secondary in the NFL right now, and then another easy matchup against the Tennessee Titans last week, wide receiver 83. He's been such a disappointment during this absence, but where did he come in your rankings? You don't have it pulled up. Let me pull it up real quick. So let me find it real quick. So you have Boyd 39 right now, and I have him at 42. Would that change if Jamar Chase was ruled inactive?
I don't know. With the way he's been on this little cold streak, I don't know that you want to upgrade him too much. I mean, at this point, if Chase is out, I'm definitely starting Boyd where I can. Like I said, I want these Bengals in my lineups everywhere with the over-unders game. But since that blow-up game at week 7 at Atlanta, his fantasy production has actually decreased every game, and to the point where I'm pretty sure the 3.6 PPR points against the Titans was as bottom out as it's going to get, because it's just an issue of the targets weren't really necessarily there, and he's only caught 2 balls in back-to-back games, whereas the whole month before that he was more of catching 5 or 6 a game. And even earlier this season, when Chase was active, he still had the occasional blow-up game. But with a guy that's kind of erratic like Tyler Boyd, in the first 5 weeks of the season, he had a couple of double-digit PPR performances, and then he had 3 games with fewer than 7 points, and that's what you get with Boyd. Expecting a handful of more targets this week. I mean, like I said, he bottomed out on Sunday, so there's nowhere to go but up. And like I said, in this game, I'm hoping it's as advertised, which is a game where we don't actually have to see these teams punters too much, and it just goes back and forth. And at that point, I think you can justify Boyd as a pretty solid wide receiver 3. Should Chase get ruled out, I don't know if I could get him inside my top 30. Like, he may go up half a dozen to 8 spots at tops, because you said he was around 39. But just because of the little cold streak he's on, I'm a little. I don't believe I could get him up too much higher than 30.
Last player on this game here, Joe Mixon, concussion was limited in Thursday's practice. He's trending towards playing, but has not been fully cleared from protocol yet. However, back-to-back practices are always a good sign for his chances of playing. Where does he land in your rankings? Is he an RB1 if active, RB2 for you? There's again, full slate of games, so it changes things.
Yeah, he'll come across right on that border. Typically, where he is every week, a healthy Joe Mixon is a guy that you have around RB10 to RB14 pretty much every week. And in this game, again, it's such the appeal of potentially going back and forth now. Assuming he is cleared, and it looks like it's trending that way, he could cede a few more snaps to Samaje Perine, who has proven over not just the last couple of games, but before he was actually being more busy as a pass catcher over the last, say, 6 weeks or so. So that's probably something that will continue. And in a game where we anticipate a lot of passes, a lot of passing back and forth, it's a game where, you could probably arguably justify putting Perine in, as a flex play, even if Mixon is back in, just depending on, most teams are probably battling injuries at some point or another. So you could probably justify Perine as a, top 40 play this week, even if Mixon's back. But assuming Mixon is active, I'm ranking him about where I normally do, like I said, in that, running back 11 to 12 or 10 range.
So you teed up the next one for me pretty well, Jody. It was about Samaje Perine. So he's definitely performed admirably in Joe Mixon's absence. The 2 weeks that he was here, week 11 and week 12. In week 11, he was 11 for 30 on the ground and 4-4 in the air with 52 yards. And, of course, that was the 3-score game. 63.4% route rate and RB10 on that given week. Sorry, And then on the next week for week 12, he was I messed up. I'm sorry. RB2 that week, RB10 in week 12, 17, 58, and 1 on the ground with 4 and 35 through the air. But this was the interesting fact here. And you hit the hammer on the nail when you said that he's been more involved in the passing game. 68.4% route rate. Mixon never saw more than 65% route rate all year and has only eclipsed 60% twice. So I think you're right. If active, and we're expecting him to be active, Perine's probably still going to be heavily involved. And in a game where you're playing the Chiefs with a high over-under, like you stated earlier, where they're probably going to be passing the ball to keep up, I think Perine does slide into the top 40. I have him right now, and I haven't finalized the rankings or posted them because of the Thursday night game, but he's right now as running back 39 for me. ECR is, let's see where he's at. ECR looks like it's a little higher, actually, 36 right now. So they're still going off, I think, the news of Mixon being limited. So that being said, I think that's about the right area for him if Mixon is out. Now,
he's running back 32 for the season. Now, I know he huge 50-something fantasy points over the last couple of weeks. That'll help. But he does have a career high in targets already, and that's through 11 games. So he's still got 6 more contests to add to that. He could easily, get up around 50 targets. And anytime you see a running back in that 50 target range, at that point they're arguably fantasy relevant, on a week to week basis. Now, Perine's had some, stinker games, of course, just games where if Joe Mixon's getting 5 touchdowns and 30 carries or whatever, Perine's not going to play much. In particular, if they're nursing a lead in the second half and they're not really calling on too many passes, but. At this point, with the last couple of weeks, and in particular, the last 6 weeks in general, where he's caught, multiple receptions in like 7 out of the last 8 games, something like that. Like I said, I think that sounds what the fantasy experts are telling you is, he's in that you can arguably justify, like I said, around the top 40 this week.
Let's get some start sit questions answered. There's a few in the chat. Then we'll hop back over to the show sheet and talk about Najee Harris and Darnell Mooney and the rest of the supporting cast in those offenses. First question we have is from Jelly of the Month. Welcome, Jelly of the Month, to the show as always. PPR, Jacoby Myers or Josh Palmer? I answered this one in the Discord channel, but he probably wants to hear it from you as well.
I'm probably leaning Palmer. I don't think Mike Williams plays, so that pretty much guarantees Palmer's role and routes. You got to like the matchup a little better. Buffalo, their defense is good against the pass. They're not, they're not the team you necessarily avoid, but also Jacoby Myers is, we saw him exit last week with that shoulder injury. I know he came back, but he only caught 3 passes. And I looked this week when I was doing projections and whatnot. He's been very muted in his history against this particular opponent. So that's about where I have him in my personal rankings is, muted is the word I use, but he'll be somewhere he's a top 40 PPR option each and every week, but I'm not expecting necessarily a touchdown in this game. So to me, that kind of limits his upside. Whereas with Palmer, a little more consistent nose for the end zone, has a much more deep play, ability. And again, in this matchup, wait, did I say that they were Chargers? I think I got them mixed up with playing the Chiefs, but the Chargers game is also pretty appealing. It's one that I've looked at. Yeah, with the Raiders.
Raiders, yep.
Yeah, that's the second highest over under for the week. So
yeah, I leaned Palmer as well. I was asked this question in Discord. I said Palmer. I think I have him at like 27 and 30. Palmer, of course, at 27. So it looks like your analysis matched mine. Let's move along. Naughty's question is, evening, gentlemen, from a 6-game winning streak to a 3-game losing streak, fantasy is rough. Yes, it is. How do we recover when the race is so tight? You just got to continue to grind the waivers and continue to make the best possible start-sit questions and maximize your optimal lineup.
Be proactive, not reactive. That's something I mentioned, in at least every other week in many of the articles that I write, is that to not sit back and let things happen. So that means you keep pushing the waiver wire, and if you still have the ability to trade, it's something you have to potentially look at. Don't freak out. Hopefully, you said a 6-game winning streak, 3-game losing streak. Yeah, that's the pros and cons. Hopefully, this week stabilizes for you. Only 2 teams are off, so maybe your team's back to full strength for the first time. But again, if that's the case, be proactive on their waivers or pick up guys for free. Like I said, look at next week. That's the key. 6 teams aren't available next week. In week 14, whether your playoff start or it's your last regular season game, definite must win. So start looking at it. Look at your first come, first serve waiver wire like right now, and look at what teams are off next week and see if you can get a heads up on your opponent. And maybe if you have to, you block your opponent. You do that. I don't generally like to play that way, but hey, it's a cutthroat world, so do what you got to do.
Okay, next question we have, and I've seen a lot of start-sit questions this week in regards to Watson, but would you start Fields or Watson this week at quarterback?
You can't start Fields. He's still – I don't expect he's active. If he is active, you're looking at a potential situation where it's going to be a very limited offense for him. The Bears have nothing to play for this year other than draft position, so it would actually benefit them to sit him. So Watson, interesting. It's a risky situation. Deshaun Watson hasn't been on the field in 700 days, I believe. Is
2 years.
700 days. However, and the matchup actually isn't that great against the Texans. However,
very tough,
the matchup is great against the Texans in the standpoint of Deshaun Watson is going to attract a lot of attention, and this is talk about revenge game. This is going to be a potential hatred situation for him. So, Billy, I don't know. You're a ranker. You're an expert. You're doing much better than I am, and all that kind of stuff this year. I find this to be one of the most difficult situations this year. I see, like in the ECR, Watson is about where I wanted him to be, which is around, I think he's 11 or 12, somewhere in that range. But I feel like, because of his legs and because of this situation, he easily has top 5 upside. However, it's not necessarily a good matchup. And if he's a little rusty, you could easily see him struggling in this game and falling out of the I don't know. I think he's probably got a pretty safe floor, but you could see him tumbling, closer to QB 20 range, which could, potentially hurt a lot of people. I'm really interested in to see how the situation plays out. I think he's ranked correctly about right now. I think people are factoring in the risk reward, which is why he's a borderline QB1.
Yeah, Fields got in a limited session today, a full session today, which was encouraging. That being said, Deshaun Watson.
Okay, if the question is if Justin Fields is considered clear, which I would be skeptical of, but let's just say we have to assume that they're telling the truth of that, then he proved time after time that he can be a top 5, top 3 option every week. So I think that really, really complicates things.
Yeah, I was going to say I lean Fields in this scenario simply because we know that he's not going to be throwing the ball as much. He only has one 200-yard game all season. All of his fantasy points has come on the ground. Now the fear is he takes a big hit from a linebacker
Yeah,
and he's ruled out. That's a real scenario here with a shoulder injury.
if we're fed that he's close to 100%, to as good as a guy with a busted non-throwing shoulder can be, and they feel comfortable in a lost season starting him, yes, I'm going to put him in ahead of Watson. Like I said,
in my rankings right now, I have him.
Honestly don't think that he could be. It's possible with that injury, separated non-throwing shoulder, they could be healed that quickly. But hey, we've seen stranger things happen. So hey, an active, healthy Justin Fields does come out ahead of Watson for me.
Yeah, as of right now, I have Fields at 11, Deshaun Watson at 13, ECR and Watson is 12. I have Brady in between them right now because it's a good matchup against New Orleans secondary. Watson, just for me, it's a lot of it matchup based. You're talking about the Houston Texans, who are the number 3 defense versus opposing quarterbacks. They're only allowing 12.59 fantasy points per game, which is nothing. There's only 2 teams that are more formidable than them, and that's the Broncos and Philadelphia Eagles, who have 2 extremely difficult shutdown corners. That being said, Green Bay is no pushover on defense against quarterbacks either. They're top 11 against the quarterback position, but said earlier, Fields is rushing the ball, and so that's where I think these fantasy points are going to come. Green Bay gives up a lot on the ground to running backs. They give up a lot to rushing quarterbacks as well, and I don't think that that's going to change with Fields' shoulder at all. So it's definitely a concern, though, that he could get re-injured, but I'm going to roll the dice here. If he's on the field and he's starting and they're saying that he's a full participant, then I'm going to roll the dice with Fields this week, and I want to dust the rust off of Deshaun Watson. Moving along, Jacoby Myers. This one's from Giselle. Jacoby Myers, Rachaad White, Gus Edwards, or Pacheco. I think there's still a lot of pending news that affects this one for me. I understand he's trying to get Jacoby in tonight. That being said, Leonard Fournette did practice this week, so he practiced today, which would affect Rachaad White here. You have some news that would affect Gus Edwards as well with Dobbins. The only for sure thing right now is going to be Jacoby and Pacheco, but I probably wait this one out and start 2 of the 3 running backs. What about you, Jody?
I'll lean the same. Pacheco actually really, really interesting this week, in particular with Jerick McKinnon has missed practice all week so far. So, if McKinnon is out this week, then I expect it will be Pacheco that factors in more as a receiver there. And again, we've talked about this game toward the top of the show. I want all these players possible in that game. And it'll be interesting to see if Melvin Gordon is quickly activated for them, if he's busy this week. But we finally saw the debut of Ronald Jones last week, but I don't feel like Jones, with his showing throughout his whole career as a receiver, I think it'll definitely be Pacheco. So I think Pacheco, really, really interesting play for me this week. But I wouldn't go out of my way with those options. I wouldn't go out of my way to force Myers in, if that's the question.
Jody and I agree on this one. Next question is from Trey. Full PPR, start 2, Travis Etienne, Jeff Wilson, Rachaad White, or Lenny?
I'm leaning with the Rachaad White over Lenny. The other 2 guys, they'll feel like definitely Etienne's back. Supposedly he was cleared and could have returned in that game. They wanted to show caution, and Jermichael Hasty was having a fine week, so I guess they just figured, well, we'll just ride the hot hand and keep Travis healthy. But from everything that's been indicated, he's fully healthy, and we know a fully healthy Travis Etienne over the last month has been an RB1, and that's about where he should be this week. That's another game with a pretty high over-under.
Yeah, I agree here. I think it's the order in which he has them listed, Etienne and Jeff Wilson for me. And even if active, I'm probably starting White over Lenny this week. They'll probably ease him back into action as he's recovering from injury. So, Trey, there you have it. Jody and I agree. Go ahead and go Etienne and Jeff Wilson. Another question from Trey is full PPR, Juwan Johnson or Knox. I'm already starting Diggs and Bass. Add Knox, and that feels like a relying on a lot of one team during a Thursday night game. Thanks and good luck this week. Juwan Johnson didn't practice today, so I'd say you probably want to throw in Knox.
Yeah, I have Knox comfortably ahead of Juwan Johnson. Now I understood that Juwan Johnson, kept scoring. He's got 5 touchdowns this season. He was, coming into last week, I think he was tied in 15 for the year, but it's still just interesting, difficult situation, and it doesn't leave you anything, I think, to change to. So unless you can pick up somebody for Sunday, because that's a Monday game, you can't chance it, because if you were to ride Johnson and he were to be inactive Monday, you have nothing. What are you going to do? Pick up Adam Trotman and pray, at that point. So
the matchup's good for Knox too. Get the tight end position.
It's been one of their weak links. I think the New England's. I wrote that up in my Thursday Night Football preview. They've given up either the 7th or 8th most fantasy points to
eighth most. All right, there you have it, Trey. Go ahead and start Knox tonight and roll the dice with all of those Bills. It's a good team to stack, at least not something like I don't know, like the Bears or something.
Hey,
right, Jody?
The Bills have scored 33 plus 3 of the last 4 times they've played New England, and the only time they didn't was that crazy windy game. So,
all right,
Josh Allen hasn't had too many problems figuring out this defense.
Let's do these next 2 rapid fire, and then we're going to hop back to the show sheet. Lawrence or Watson this week, quarterback?
We just talked about Deshaun Watson and the risk factor there, but I probably had Watson a couple spots ahead of him. I mean, Lawrence, Trevor Lawrence.
Yep.
I've got him. Trevor Lawrence is a top 10 guy for me this week, and like I said, Watson is 11 or 12 somewhere in there. So.
Yep, versus Detroit, you're going to want to start Lawrence here. And then the next one, rapid fire, Pacheco or Singletary? I go Pacheco pretty easily.
Yes. Agreed. Okay. Singletary hasn't had a lot of success against New England. He's I think he had he might have scored a game or 2 against them last week, but overall his stats have been pretty unimpressive against New England. So
let's talk about Najee Harris. So he had that oblique injury this last week. He did not practice today, Thursday, trending towards missing this week's game. Likely gets a questionable tag, and I'd say that's at best. I'm going to lean towards him being ruled out entirely, and most likely tomorrow. That being said, Jaylen Warren is coming back from injury. Probably leads a 2-headed, 3-headed backfield. I don't know how many heads are we going to have in this backfield if Najee Harris is out.
Probably 3 sounds about right, but a healthy Jaylen Warren to me would be, obviously the main factor there, because we know at one point the last time that Warren managed to play a full game, he had a 43 to 59% snap share. He was 43% versus Najee Harris was at 59%, but Warren, we had been hearing for weeks that he was going to start factoring more, and he slowly did so. And I feel like if he's healthy, back from the hamstring and then ready to roll, I think that they'll give him back that lead dog role. And I would feel like, having a handicap, but I would say he'd be a strong candidate for at least 50% of the total touches for Pittsburgh's running backs. I don't know how much Anthony McFarland and Benny Snell would factor in. Looking at the usage from Monday, it looks like Snell was the number 2. I mean, he did get the short yardage carry and got a couple of targets, but Anthony McFarland was more involved in that part of the game. So I guess it'll depend on game script, but it feels like, from a fantasy perspective, I couldn't see a scenario unless they announced that Snell and or McFarland were going to start the game, which I don't envision. If Warren's active, if he returns to the lineup, I have some interest in him this week. But even if Najee Harris isn't ruled out, I would be very scared to rely on him this week. It feels like a situation where, you could see him come in and take a hit or 2 and then just say, nah, this ain't going to work. And then they pull him off the field. So even if he isn't ruled out, I don't think I could put him in this week.
Yeah, Snell last week ran 42.9% of the snaps. That was 40.6% of the snaps. That was as Najee was exiting. Anthony McFarland came in to 30.4. He did, though, have more target share, 7.1 versus Snell's 3.6. I've always called Snell quicksand Snell because it looks like he's running in quicksand. I think Jaylen Warren has the ability to run both those roles, though, the passing down back and the 1-2 down back, as long as he's healthy. But I think we do see some sort of 3-headed monster with Warren being the primary back. Let's talk about same situation but different position. Darnell Mooney is out for the year with an ankle injury now. How does this shake up the pass catchers in Chicago? What does this do to Kmet? What does this do to Claypool? And then who is the wide receiver 2 moving forward? Is it UQSB? Is it Pettis? Is it Pringle? Is it Harry? How do you shake up this wide receiver corps?
I would. I'd like to shake my fist at it and just avoid it if I possibly could. It's just, it's a situation right now. We don't even know who's going to be the quarterback for Chicago, but asking who's the wide receiver two for a team that's likely to be, at best 28th or 29th in passing. I mean, if you're looking at it from last week, I think Byron Pringle popped up. He had 54% snap share last week, and the other guys were all in that 35 to 40% range. But it probably would benefit Cole Kmet more than anybody. But Claypool's a guy that has been a little frustrating for me too. It felt like Simeon last week was kind of going out of his way. I know he had that impressive that deep shot that Claypool reeled in. What situation, Billy? You're like me. You're like a ranker. So you start thinking in terms of this is where fantasy obsessive people, but you'll see a guy reel in a 35-yard catch. So the way your brain processes it, you're like, okay, 4.5 points. It's the same thing for if you're watching your running back. If you're watching Christian McCaffrey run out there and catch a dump off pass and get 4 yards, that's how you think. You're like, okay, 1.4 points. So you start calculating things that way, and that's about as good as it gets to me for the Bears. It's just been so inconsistent. To me, I wouldn't even feel comfortable right now with even Claypool as a factor in any lineups, just simply because I don't know that Fields is going to play. If we're going back to what we hit on about 10, 15 minutes ago, we're saying yes that Fields has been cleared, and by all indications he's going to start and play the game. Well then, okay, well, top 10, so interesting matchup. I mean, I think you could arguably get Chase Claypool to, I don't know, Billy, wide receiver 50 range. I mean, late 40s to early.
Yeah, maybe mid 40s at best. It's going to be challenging. It's like you said, it's just not a high volume offense. Let's hop back into the questions. We got a few more, and we only have a few minutes, so I want to try to get as many of these as we can answered before we call it a night. And let me see, here it was. He needs to pick up a tight end because David Njoku is really questionable. Who does he pick up? Conklin, Ingram, or Logan Thomas? And who should he drop? Ooh, that's a tough drop right there. I'm waiting on this one as long as I can because his options to drop, Jody, in case you couldn't see it, was Palmer, Sut, Burke, Gus, the Bus, or Warren. And so I'm going to wait all the way up until the last minute because I want to see if Njoku is open.
Yeah, that's tough that you'd have to cut a guy that you really don't want to have to cut just to simply get a possible 1 week fill in at tight end. Obviously you don't want to take a zero, but who's your Ingram? Evan Ingram, been a frustrating guy for me all season, but interesting this week. Detroit, that game, second or third highest over under for the week. The Lions are allowing the fourth most fantasy points to the position. Feels like the kind of game where Ingram could be more involved. But, of course, like I said, Ingram's a guy who's kind of hurt me this season because, I spent the summer talking about how in the past how much Doug Peterson used his tight ends, and I thought that Evan Ingram had tight end one potential this year, and it kind of started off pretty good, but it certainly has, decreased down to where he's been really, really difficult to trust. But feels like if he's on your waiver wire, feels like a nice little pickup this week. But I agree with Billy, especially when you look at Deshaun Watson's time in here in Houston. He relied on his tight ends quite a bit. So if Njoku is active, he feels like a guy that's locked in top 10 option this week. The Texans are better against wide receivers than they are against tight ends, and we saw that last week. So agree with Billy. Take it down to the wire if you have to. And, at that point, I don't remember the options that you'd have to cut. Gus Edwards was one of them.
Gus Edwards or Warren, I think, are the only two options that you'd want to cut out of this field because it was Palmer, Sutton, and Burke, the other ones. So.
If J.K. Dobbins returns this week, which is a possibility, I mean, I guess you could consider cutting Gus Edwards, but I hate to do that, especially for a 1 week rental at tight end.
Yeah, I want to make sure that whatever league you're in, that if they're declared out, If you're able to drop them to IR, a lot of leagues you can. So if you can, you don't need to drop anyone. Make sure that your league either allows it or doesn't allow it. And if you aren't allowed to do that, I would drop Gus in this group. But take it down to the wire because he might be active. So don't do anything preemptively right now. You got some options. You have some outs. I would wait and hold out. Let's move along here. Do you stick with Drake London, a good matchup as a wide receiver 3, or do you pick up somebody like MVS, Quez Watkins, Corey Davis, or Khalif Raymond? No, stick with Drake London.
Yeah. Again, Billy, what's your adage about the wide receiver 1 on a team? And,
yeah, you want to go the wide receiver 1, even if it's a tough matchup or if they've had a slump and
even a low volume
offense. He's still the number 1 option versus these guys who are 2 and 3 at best. Let's go ahead and go Travis Etienne. Really good. I'll happily drop. No.
Travis Etienne, the answer is yes. You started.
They're asking if you should drop him for Hasty. No.
Oh.
No.
Come on, it's not a serious question.
It can't be a serious question. He's trolling.
That's a troll.
I'm bookmarking that. We're gonna put that out.
Yeah, Jermichael Hasty's.
No, absolutely not. Moving on. Do you have to start Fournette if he's active? I don't think so.
Leonard Fournette?
Yeah, I don't think you have to start him if he's active.
I mean, we saw Rachaad White starting to take on more and more touches, and now with 2 really fantastic games in a row, and the coach has already come out and said that he's going to kind of try to take the hot hand approach. So if that's the truth, then I would honestly expect Fournette at best to get maybe a third of the touches. I mean, I guess they could go to a committee backfield, 50-50. But if the coach is true to his word, which I know you can't trust coaches, but why would you go away from Rachaad White after the last couple of games he's had?
Yeah, I don't. I think even if Fournette's active, I think that Rachaad White probably outsnaps him.
I mean, he hasn't done well this year. All the opportunities to add. What's the average in 3-point whatever yards a carry? He just kind of looks a little sluggish. He hasn't even been that involved as receivers as consistently as he was last year. So
here's one. It gets a little more interesting with some of the news today, but I think regardless of how bad he's been, I still pick Kamara in this one. So start 1, Kamara, Rachaad Wright, Swift, Brian Robinson, Zeke, or Zonovan Knight. The interesting piece, though, is that you have some injury news on Gibson, which if he's inactive, Brian Robinson could see a major workload. That being said, do you trust him over somebody like Kamara?
No, I mean, Kamara, he's kind of tumbling down in our projections and rankings. It's been a pretty rough little stretch here for him ever since that blow-up game against the Raiders. He hasn't been terrible the last couple of games, but averaged 3.5 yards a carry in week 11 and 1.9 yards a carry last week. A little rough. He's still been involved as a receiver, which you like to see. But I like what you said there. If Antonio Gibson were somehow rolled out, Brian Robinson snagged his first career touchdown last week, so he showed the hands that maybe he could be a reliable option in that field. That would be really, really interesting to me. If I got a guaranteed 20-ish touches for Robinson, he's going to sneak up into definitely around the range that Kamara is right now. And if I'm not mistaken, like in the ECR for us, Kamara may dip down to like wide receiver, running back 16 or 18 this week. It's not a particularly appealing matchup against Tampa.
Yeah, I think that's something you want to wait and see, because if Gibson is ruled out for whatever reason, Brian Robinson would probably be like running back 14 through 16 range for me, which is at the tail end to where Kamara is right now. Kamara's had a really bad stretch. Half-point PPR, we'll use that scoring since that's what we use for rankings. Running back 51 last week, running back 19 week 11, running back 36 week 10, and running back 23 week 9 versus Baltimore. So he has had some tough matchups in that stretch as well, but the Saints aren't particularly good this year, and we've seen them not utilize Kamara in the same fashion that they had. And you look back at even like week 5 where he had 23 attempts on the ground. He had 7 last week, 12 the week before, 8 before that, 9 before that. he's not getting that 15 to 20, carry game anymore. And he's not seeing the 9-10 targets a game anymore either.
No,
So,
and those were games without Mark Ingram. He still wasn't getting the.
yeah, so it has to be a little bit of a concern. I understand the question here, and I'd probably lean Robinson if Gibson's out. If not, I'd just continue to roll with Kamara and hope for the best, quite frankly. Let's do 2 more questions. We're going to call it a night. And then anyone who we don't get to your questions, go ahead and ask us inside Discord. I'm going to pick some people in here that I don't see as much in Discord, so that way everyone else who we don't get to, you can just shoot us a message in there. So here's one for you. Any buy low opportunity this week from a trade deadline? Maybe Najee or Jeff Wilson. Do you like any of those for a buy low opportunity?
If you can buy low on Jeff Wilson, I certainly would do that. Najee, you don't. I mean, right now, you don't. I mean, he's looking like he's trending towards out, and there's not a lot, of hope for the Steelers to turn the season around. So it feels like a situation where they could shut him down. So I don't. I mean, I say that as a person who just acquired Najee Harris. And my home league's trade deadline was week 12. So on Thanksgiving, I made a trade and I got Harris, but a little concerned right now with the injury because it's just been so mysterious. Like we're not quite sure what the injury is. It sounds like the news was a little positive today, but he's not trending towards plan. So he's not a guy that I would definitely want to target. Jeff Wilson, though, I don't know why he would be buy low with Raheem Mostert has been out. Now I know Mostert's trending towards returning this week. So if someone figures, he's going to lose carries to Mostert, so I want to move away from him. It felt like Wilson had clearly become their 1A at minimum over the last month. So
yeah, pretty easily. I don't think you're buying low on Wilson either, but good luck. Let's do some rapid fire, and then we'll call it a night. McKenzie or Traylon Burks this week?
Isaiah McKenzie?
Yep.
No, you're starting Burks.
Yep, so I agree.
Wide receiver 1 over a wide receiver 3.
And then Warren, White, or Pacheco. Pick 2. Pacheco's in for sure, and then we'll just wait on news with. I still think White over Warren, even if Fournette is active.
Yeah, Rashad White. Yeah, last 2 games, he's been really, really good. So stick with the hot hand.
Okay, and then last one of the night. Should I start Singletary tonight or wait on Patterson, Fournette, Pacheco, and Kyren Williams?
I would definitely start Pacheco. I think right now over Singletary this week. Not a really particularly fantastic matchup for Singletary to be a top 20 running back or top 25 running back this week. He has to get into the end zone, which he hasn't consistently been doing this season. So I'd rather start Pacheco right now.
All right, I'm going to do one more so I can find the Discord links. People are asking for the Discord link. So buy me some time here and answer this one. Zay versus the Lions or Bucks versus Philly? While you're answering that, I'm going to pull up the Discord link and post it in the chat.
You'll have to read that question again. Zay Jones versus
the Lions?
Mm-hmm.
Or Burks versus Philly?
Oh, Burks. I thought you said Bucks versus Philly. Wait, what? A baseball question?
Discord link is posted in the chat, everybody. I just posted it just now.
Yeah, Treylon Burks, you have to like what he's been doing over the last 2 or 3 games. He's developing into a legitimate wide receiver 1. I know it's a low volume Tennessee Titans passing offense, but I think I like he's showing why he was such a highly regarded pick. It's not a particularly great matchup, in particular with Philly's cornerbacks. And then looking at the other one, I still like Jones because, again, it comes down to you're talking about, pretty much a wide receiver 1 versus you go to Zay Jones. I know fantastic last week. It's a really, really fun, good matchup, but he is, a wide receiver. Well, I guess you could call Zay Jones their wide receiver 2. Would you call Zay Jones their 2 or 3 over Marvin Jones?
I think it's like the 2B, quite frankly.
Yeah. The Jones brothers, they rotate every other week or whatnot. I don't know that there's a really wrong answer here. I guess there's some concern with Treylon Burks against Philly's cornerback. So I can see you wanting to pivot to Zay Jones, but it feels like the right answer would be to stick with the wide receiver on the more talented kid or whatnot.
I agree with Jody here. Always go with the wide receiver 1 over, even in the low volume pass offense, versus the wide receiver 2/3. That is it, everybody. If we did not get to your question, there is the Discord link. It's in YouTube. Go ahead and give that a click. Go ahead and join. There's a few different channels in there that you can ask your questions to. I have a channel there, the Muzio member channel, that I'm answering questions every single day. You can go ahead and shoot me a message in there and at me, so I make sure I see it. And then Jody answers questions all the time in there as well. So thank you for tuning in, everybody. I'll be on here tomorrow at 4 p.m. Eastern with Chris Raybon from Action Network, discussing our rankings heading into the weekend. We're going to test some running backs, some receivers, and a couple tight ends, and we're going to compare them versus ECR and talk about our differences. So tune in tomorrow, 4 p.m. Eastern with Chris and I, and we'll see you all then. Good luck in your matchups and Thursday Night Football. Have a good night.